This is why I have the mud water. I haven't even taken a sip yet. That's why I'm so, we're like, what am I talking about?
I can hear the drinking noises in my ear, in my headphones.
5 minutes later. Okay. Don't ask me why I look like it's fall. I'm well aware it's August. It's actually a heat wave in LA. It is extremely hot out. You would not know it by the way that I am dressed. And I'm holding a very hot cup of mud water for a little caffeine boost. Welcome.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored. I would love. Please, at least put me on your PR list. I am back for another Molly Rambles, if you couldn't tell by this rambling on intro. I feel like I am so not used to doing these anymore. I know it's just literally me coming, sitting down, and like talking off the dome, if you will, but I'm not cool enough to say that. I'm not cool enough to say most things, but somehow you're here listening to me. It's just me rambling, as the name of the series would suggest, but I feel like I'm even more rambly than usual, so my apologies. We'll get back in the flow. It's just been like so many vlogs recently. But that's why I'm back doing these, because I know you missed them. And this video has been sparked by some online discourse that I've been seeing, and I feel like I gotta weigh in because I'm listening to Blind Talk chitter chatter away about it, and I'm like, hi, I'm here just on YouTube. But I'm all up on Blind Talk, you guys. It is on my feed, okay? I am scrolling, I see you. So this is not only a conversation that I've seen happen in some videos on Blind Talk, but it's actually a conversation that I feel like has been had in the blind community for as long as I can remember, and it's a conversation that I've had personally with my blind friends over the years. As we all know, the blind community is not a monolith. We all have different perspectives and opinions, and I am simply sharing mine, so do not take this for really anything. I'm just Molly, blind, sharing my thoughts on, is it better, in quotes, to be fully blind or legally blind? Now, I've sat on both ends of that spectrum, which is the experience that I'm bringing to this conversation. I grew up with vision. I'd say I grew up sighted, okay? Because that's how much vision I had. For all intents and purposes, I feel like I lived a sighted person's life. I was just on the edge of legally blind, but I had so much remaining vision. So I really lived like a sighted person. I played competitive sports on sighted teams. I could read and write. I could see colors and faces. And I didn't have to use a mobility aid as a child and all of that, right? So I've been on that end of the vision loss spectrum. And then because I have progressive disease and I have a very aggressive form of it, retinitis pigmentosa, in case you're new here. What am I saying? None of you are new here. The algorithm doesn't push me to new people. You're all old. You've been here. You know the deal. Lost the majority of my vision at 14 and now live essentially as a completely blind person because I do not have usable vision. I have some light and shadow perception remaining. It ain't that functional, okay? Pretty much living in the more fully blind space. The best way I always describe it is in a room of 20 blind friends, which I've been in many a room of 20 blind people. I am usually like number 19 most blind. The other 18 folks see more than I do, and then like the one with nothing, they're the one that's worse off than me. They've got none, and that's it. That's where I sit in the blindness spectrum, I feel like. Now, there's also a lot of discussion in the blind community, but even more so outside of the blind community. Like I hear a lot of non-blind people chitter-chattering and chiming in on this, which, sit down, you have no place. You don't get to weigh in on this. Only the blind folk do. But the conversation of like, can legally blind people say they are blind? Where I sit on this, again, I am only speaking as Molly. Yes, you can. Just say you're blind. I don't care. Does not affect me if you have more vision than me and call yourself blind. There are blind people who are fully or completely blind that do take offense to it and find it frustrating. And even more than that, there are many sighted people who feel like you're not allowed to claim blindness unless you're completely blind. As somebody who, as I said, has pretty much been on every level of the spectrum, almost, I don't have a problem with you saying that. Maybe that's a hot take, but that's how I feel. So go off, say it. But in case you're like not super familiar, you're new to the blind community, you're maybe not in the blind community yourself, but you have some relevant relation to it. I'll just quickly explain legally blind versus blind. Legally blind is in North America 20 over 200. So that means what a normal sighted person can see from 200 feet away, you have to be 20 feet away, and that is with best correction, meaning after any surgical interventions, cataracts, treatment, contacts, glasses, like that's with your best correction. The other way to determine it is
Field of view? That's what you're thinking.
your field of view, thank you. Your peripheral. So I believe it's less than 20% of your field of vision.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so confusing for me right now? It's like I'm new to this. I believe it's less than 20, might be less than 10. Fairly certain it's less than 20. This is why I have the mud water. I haven't even taken a sip yet. That's why I'm so like, what am I talking about?
I can hear the drinking noises in my headphones.
5 minutes later. Okay. I feel like I chugged half. Maybe in the next 10 minutes that'll kick in. And I'll be more clear-headed, but likely not. Then we go to, completely fully blind. This is going to be, as I said, like no usable vision. Maybe light perception, maybe shadow perception, but it's not functional. It's not usable. They're no longer able to necessarily measure like a 20 over number or a percentage of your visual field, whatever I'm talking about. Or you are nothing. You see nothing. Pretty self-explanatory, but in the legally blind realm, there's typically a wide range of usable vision remaining, which is of course going to differ person to person. Now, let's get into the real tea, the real juice, the meat and potatoes of this video. What's better? I don't like playing what I call the oppression Olympics, which is where we list all of our labels and our hardships and decide who's worse off. I don't think that helps anybody. The experiences are different. I think life's all about having perspective, and I try my best not to victimize myself and not to be like, oh, woe is me, these are all of my hardships, this is how my life is worse than XYZ people, because the reality is life could always be worse, and frankly, that brings me a lot of comfort. I like to live in gratitude. And so whilst I think there are challenges that come with being more on the fully blind end of the spectrum, equally I think there are challenges that come with legally blind end of the spectrum with more remaining vision. There's pros and cons on both sides. I'm going to go over the pros and cons from my perspective of how I feel, but yours may differ. So I'm super curious to have you weigh in, especially if you, like me, have had multiple experiences across the spectrum, but equally, like if you've had stable vision your whole life or been fully blind your whole life, I'd be curious to hear your opinion on this as well. So legally blind end of the spectrum where you do have more remaining vision, frankly, you can see more. The more vision you have, it just is helpful. Every single time I lose incremental more vision, life does get more challenging in certain ways. That's just facts from my perspective. When I could read print, that made my life easier. When I could see large print, it made my life a little harder than when I could see smaller print, but sure made my life a lot easier than when I could see no print. I feel like that's just like obvious. I don't know. I feel bad saying that, but like it just is. The more vision I had to look at the world around me, it was easier. Being able to see colors was easier than now having to implement different techniques like using my Meta Ray Bans to ask what color something is, using Seeing AI, using Be My Eyes, using tactile markers, organizing my closet a certain way, memorizing every single thing I own and what color it is. That is more challenging than being able to look and see what color something is. So yes, like the more usable vision I had from my experience made a lot of the day-to-day tasks easier. It doesn't mean that I didn't have to come up with accommodations and kind of hacks and that it wasn't more challenging than having full vision, but I had enough sight that I could use sight for certain tasks. I don't have sight to use for any task now. Even things like being able to go for a walk, and like growing up, in Canada, for example, like I would see in my local strip mall like a chunk of green and I would know that's Starbucks. Or I would see a chunk of red and I would be like, okay, that's Shoppers Drug Mart. I would see a chunk of dark blue and I'd be like, that's RBC. It's RBC, right? Like I could use context clues. Was it as easy as being able to see the sign that says Starbucks? Obviously not. But it was easier than me now only relying on maps, on tactile cues, on my guide dog. That just made life easier. And I think I'm not saying that to be like, to shame people who think it's difficult not being able to read or not being able to see as much as the people around them. Your life is more challenging than those who can see. That's just facts. But I also think it's so important to live with gratitude and have perspective. That if you did lose that, it would significantly impact your life. And I even heard from like other people with RP who have lost entire vision, like lost their light and shadow, which is likely in my future, that will also still be a massive adjustment for me. Even though it isn't super usable, it is still comforting. I do still, if I get scared, I still turn a light on just so I can feel like I see something. That is a pro to having light perception that I absolutely guarantee you I know I will miss when I no longer have that ability. And so I think it's just like having that perspective. And the reality is that the more vision you have to rely on, oftentimes, the more independence you retain. And I don't just mean like independence, not needing other humans for help. I mean like autonomy of self. I think this is something we don't often talk about when we discuss like independence as a blind person. I hate relying on technology. I don't feel autonomous. Am I grateful that the technology exists that allows me to be as, quote, independent as possible in terms of not needing human intervention? Yes. But I don't like feeling attached to technology. That if my Meta Ray-Ban glasses were to die, that I have now lost a form of independence. I like having tangible independence, which is why I do really appreciate that I know Braille. And it is something like I would rather products in my cabinet have Braille or tactile markers on them than the answer being use technology. And that's why I still advocate that blind people should know Braille. And that's why in my accessibility consulting with brands, I still advocate that Braille and or tactile codes should be implemented. And we shouldn't simply be relying on like Navalins or QR codes. I think that tech is amazing and I'm so grateful it exists. But for me, it still does feel like I'm reliant on something that is not the same as having vision to rely on. So I do feel like I have in certain ways less independence no matter how independent I am, if that makes sense. I also think that it is a privilege to be able to at times pass as sighted if you want to. And I remember having this discussion with a friend of mine in the blind community many years ago where she was talking about going to a job interview and how she wasn't going to bring her cane because she could see enough to not have to have her cane. And she was concerned that having it would reduce her chances of getting the job. And she would rather get the job and then raise her, accessibility requirements to HR after. That's a whole other discussion. That's not for this video. What I'm saying is, at my end of vision loss, I do not have the privilege to ever not have a mobility aid. 100% of the time, I identify as blind in the public, or at the very least as disabled, because I have to have my cane or my guide dog. It's a non-negotiable. And even when I go out, say Elton's sick or can't come, and I'm going out with another person, there is not a universe at this point in my life where I would not bring my cane. Even if I could fully rely on sighted guide, I hate that feeling of, again, not having autonomy to move independently. It makes me feel less secure, less safe, less stable, less independent, all the things. So I 100% of the time do have a mobility aid with me that publicly identifies me and socially identifies me as blind and or disabled. And so that does change social dynamics. It changes the way people treat me. It changes the way people interact with me. And it changes opportunities in work, in dating, in friendships. So I do think that whether you utilize it or not, there is a certain level of privilege in being able to move about the world and choose when you are identifying as blind and when you are not putting that forward. Now, when it comes to the cons of being legally blind, oftentimes you're not believed or you're questioned or people think you're faking it. I mean, Lord knows I still get that accusation, but it's definitely more common amongst those with more remaining vision because of all of these misconceptions that exist. That to be blind, you see nothing. That is like such a massive, massive rampant misconception amongst the general public. So when you, with remaining vision, even if you're out there with your cane, but you're looking at your phone because you're using Zoom, or you're out there with your cane, but you're making eye contact with somebody, nodding and smiling or waving at somebody, doing what people would deem as like visual things. All of a sudden, society is skeptical. You may not get the assistance that you need. This is something I dealt with a lot. Like people just not ever offering me the help that I really, really needed because they just assumed that I could see enough to do it. And that was really frustrating, always constantly having to justify yourself and advocate.
It's more than just people accusing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like losing your assistance.
Yes.
From other people because they assume that you're more capable just because like you're doing something sighted so they think you can see, or assuming life isn't as hard because it looks like it's easy but it's not.
Right. Yeah. When you're able to use more remaining vision to do things, people often aren't seeing how hard you're working to do that thing. And it can be really, really difficult when you are at that precipice of not needing the mobility aid, but maybe having benefits from using it. Like it's this like weird gray area that you're living in between that's really difficult, where it's like, should I use the cane as a signal to society that I can't see, even though I can technically see enough to navigate without it safely, but it's still a benefit for people to understand that I can't see enough or that I'm not fully sighted? Because the risk we run when we don't use a mobility aid but we need one is not only injury to ourselves and or others, but frankly just looking stupid, looking rude and ignorant or mean because you're maybe cutting in line when you don't realize that you are, because you couldn't see the line. Bumping into somebody, you look like you're just not paying attention. Asking a simple question like, where is XYZ on the shelf, when it's right in front of you?
Yesterday, when we were at the mall,
yeah,
and we reached in the shopping bag.
Oh yeah, Elton stopped at something yesterday, and so I reached out, which is what you do when the dog stops and you think there's like something in front of you. I like reached out to see what it was. He stopped at a lady's shopping bag full of her personal goods.
It was like on the floor, and you were like grabbing the bag.
I'm like grabbing her personal
like,
stuff.
What's this? And then I just like to the lady, I was like, she's blind, don't worry about her.
So yeah, that's awkward. But at least, you know, it wasn't like me not having any mobility aid. Like I clearly had a harness in my hand and a dog with me. So it like, once we say I'm blind, oh yeah, no, that seems legit. She has a dog and a harness. But like if I had no mobility aid of any kind identifying me as being a part of the blind community, I would just look like somebody invading somebody's personal space and trying to like steal from them or something, right? And so it's this weird gray area where I'm at the point where I don't have the choice. I must use the mobility aid if I want to function. But when you're in that in-between area, it's so hard to pull the trigger and make the decision of like, when do I use it versus when don't I? Do the benefits of using it outweigh the cons of using it? Like all of these weird dynamics of living in that gray area in between. And oftentimes when you are in that gray area in between, you can feel like you don't fit in anywhere. You can feel like, I'm not blind enough to be in the blind community, but I'm not sighted enough to be in the sighted community. And to feel like I don't have a place can be really emotionally difficult. It can be difficult feeling like there's nobody who really understands you. For me, when I'm around other people functionally fully blind, it's really easy. I feel very understood in a way that was maybe harder when I was in the gray area in between. Because a lot of the times amongst my vision loss journey, my vision was changing so progressively that not only were my needs constantly changing, and obviously this will differ for people who have progressive vision loss versus are in the legally blind space but are stable. There's a lot of people who are legally blind and have a lot of remaining vision and will never lose that vision. Their vision has been and always will be stable. Obviously, that's not my experience. So when I was in the progressive stages of vision loss, it was really difficult because whilst, yes, I had a lot of friends who were also legally blind and had a lot of remaining vision left, a lot of them did see more than me. And I was often, even when I could see, the more blind friend than a lot of my friends in the blind community. So even then, I felt like, well, I can't fully relate to people who like solely rely on screen readers and have to use mobility aid all the time and can't see anything, but equally like I don't fully relate to my legally blind friends because they have so much more vision than me. So it's like this weird area and you're constantly having to like balance where do I fit in and balance not only yourself when you're in the vision loss section, figuring out how are my needs changing and how is my vision changing and what is going to work for me, but then also how to communicate that, which is a lot harder than just communicating I can't see anything, which leads me perfectly into the pros of being more fully blind. People just get it. I like when people ask, I'm just like, I'm blind. And then they're like, can you see anything? I just like, no. Or I'll just be like, I see a little bit of light and shadow, but basically nothing. That's so easy for people to understand. It's very digestible. And so I definitely feel like that communication barrier and the understanding of the general public is so much easier for me now that I can't see anything usable. There are definitely tools that in the blind community are designed for people who are more on the fully blind end of the spectrum, which can make it like a more seamless, easy use. Like I exclusively use screen readers. And I know that when you're in that gray area of like, you kind of use a screen reader, but you kind of use Zoom. They don't really work seamlessly together. It can be challenging to try to find a program that does both for you and is seamless to switch off and on between when you need it. Whereas for me, like there is no switching back and forth. I know that I will just be using a screen reader and that's a more like easy, seamless experience for me. I think again, it's basically the reverse of being legally blind. I do just feel more easily understood, not just by the general public who knows nothing about blindness, but within my own community, it's easier to find my people who like, if I need to go have a vent sesh, I know which people in the blind community to go to. I go to the people who are more similar in my vision level.
It's interesting though, when I'm thinking about like, say when you've recently done some like press tours and media interviews and people like identify you as she's a legally blind creator, you know?
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting. People also like, they get the terms confused or like your identification confused about like what it means to be blind versus being legally blind are two different things.
Yeah.
There is still like some confusion in that part.
There's definitely still some confusion. Like my partner just pointed out to me, I get labeled legally blind all the time by media, by people like interviewing me for like fireside chats or introing me for a speech. Like when I do public appearances in press, I'm labeled legally blind way more often than blind. And even by my own publisher, like in all the press materials they sent me when they were like getting ready to gear up for a promo for the book, it kept consistently saying legally blind. And I was like, guys, have you read the book? No, blind, just blind. And it is like this weird world where people don't know when to, even though I like clearly everywhere identify myself just simply using the label blind and have for a very long time, I do still have people consistently labeling me as legally blind, which is interesting. And I do think because of a lot of the misconceptions and stereotypes that exist, there's definitely still elements where people like assume I can see more than I can. And I do have to like over communicate that I am blind. These are my needs. This is what help I require, la la la. Because they look at me, especially with a guide dog that does not typically look like a traditional standard guide dog, and me not looking, quote, blind, I do have like the misconceptions that I'm not disabled, or not that I'm not disabled, but that I'm not blind, that it's not a guide dog, it's just a service dog for a different kind of disability. So I do still deal with some of that, but when I come up against it, it is much more easier to communicate the blindness thing than it was when I had more remaining vision. Now, of course, the cons is that there are a lot more accommodations. I need to adapt my life and my strategies of functioning and independence a lot more. And it is frustrating. It just is. I think it's particularly frustrating, like when I talk to my friends who have been fully blind from birth, It's not frustrating for them because it is the only thing they've ever known and it's the only way they've ever done things. I think it's frustrating for me because I know how much easier it was for me to do it with more sight. I also think that technology does tend to have a bigger learning curve. Being able to zoom in on the screen and like pan around, whilst I hated when, like, say Facebook, for example, like would randomly change their layout every 6 months, it was the bane of my existence. It was, I found personally, still easier to learn it over when I could zoom in. It was slower than it was if I was sighted, but it was faster than it was with a screen reader. And more so than that, the amount of things that are simply not accessible to a screen reader is greater than the amount of things that are not accessible to Zoom. Frankly, I wouldn't even know half the time if a website was inaccessible when I was a Zoom user. What was inaccessible to me then was different than what's inaccessible to me now. What I would say would be qualified as inaccessible is like low color contrast. So like white font on a light pink background, or curly cursive fonts being used, or flashing imagery that's moving, or pop-ups in the middle of my screen unexpectedly. Things like that I would deem as like inaccessible to me, or made the experience less accessible. But most websites in some way or another I could modify and I could adapt and I could figure it out, even if it meant straining my eyes. With a screen reader, if it's not screen reader compatible, like the app, the form, the website, there's simply nothing I feel like I can do. Like I'm just trapped, I'm just locked. It's just like, no, that's just not made for you, you can't do it. And so that is frustrating. I think the reality is, like I said, that playing the Oppression Olympics benefits nobody. Arguing over which one's better, which one's harder, which one's worse, benefits nobody. They're all on a spectrum and it's all a range of difficulty. It's all a range of challenges. There's pros and cons to both, but I think harping on any of that doesn't benefit us as a community. I think together we are so much stronger than when we divide ourselves. And what is more helpful is focusing on the shared goals of what we're looking for and focusing on the shared struggles that we are trying to overcome. We equally face stigma. It might be different stigma, but we equally face different forms of social stigma. We have a shared struggle of inaccessibility, a shared struggle of feelings of isolation at times. A lot of us share the experience of grief over the life you could have had, right? And it's not just grief of loss. There's people who have stable vision their entire lives who are in this community who still experience grief. Because it's not about what they've lost, it's about the life that they could have had. The ease of being sighted and living in a world that's built for you to thrive and succeed. And none of us in this community ultimately have that. We don't live in that world. And that is a shared experience. And I think the reality is what you deem as harder or easier is all going to come down to who you are. It's an individual opinion. There's people who land on both sides. I have friends who are fully blind, who went fully blind over time and are like, wow, life's so much easier. Like Blind Tobes, he talks about that a lot, that he finds being fully blind is easier than when he was losing his vision. Equally, I have friends who are like, I would give anything to even get the most minute amount of vision. I'm going into every medical trial. I want to do experimental treatments and get surgeries, even if it might not go well, just in the hopes of gaining anything back to make my life better. It depends on where you are in your grief journey and your acceptance journey. It depends on what access you've had to community, to learning skills, to having hobbies that are accessible and inclusive, to learning things like Braille or different technologies. It depends on if you're in a rural community versus a city where you have access to getting to more things and opportunities. Like all of that is going to determine. And so this isn't like you're on this side or you're on that side. We're all in this together. Those shared challenges, like not being able to drive, employment struggles, social stigmas, those are shared between us. But our differences aren't something that should come between us. That's not where we should focus. And I think there's a way to live with empathy and compassion for others and not tear us apart. Being blind is a different experience for everyone. And I feel like on my journey of sharing my blind experience online, I've felt pulled in so many directions. And I've felt like other blind people want to impose their opinion on me and want me to then share that opinion as my own because it's their truth. And at the end of the day, all I can do is share my truth, and I'm not going to tell anybody else that their perspective or opinion is wrong, because they formed it for a reason, and that's valid. And I think it's all about just sharing and learning and keeping an open mind. And as I said, together we are stronger. If we are united in a front as a community, then the general public is going to take us and our concerns and our issues so much more seriously. So I would love to hear from other people in the community in the comment section down below, their experience and perspective on this. And if you're in a different subsection of the disability community, I would equally love to hear about your perspective within your own spectrum of disability. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want a Molly Rambles from last week about the truth of traveling with a disability, you can click over here. And if you'd like to see, I don't know, some other kind of blindness related video, you can click right there. Bye.